In Millbrook County, mornings began before the sun showed its face. The fields didn't wait for daylight. Neither did the people who worked them. On the eastern edge of the county, where rows of strawberries stretched toward the tree line like red stitches sewn into the earth, the Carter family farm had stood for 3 generations. It wasn't big. It wasn't wealthy. But it was steady. Every summer, families from town knew where their berries came from. They knew the hands that picked them. They trusted the place. And they trusted the boy who helped run it. Before we begin today's unsettling story, I want to remind you to like this video, leave a comment, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another true crime story like this. And now, let's dive into one of the most heartbreaking stories of Noah Carter. 13-year-old Noah Carter had grown up between those rows. He knew which patches ripened first, which ones needed extra watering, and which berries bruised if you handled them wrong. His father liked to say Noah could tell if a strawberry was ready just by looking at the leaves around it. On the morning of July 18, 2014, Noah was up before anyone else in the house. The sky was still gray, the kind of color that made the farm feel half asleep. Noah pulled on his faded blue t-shirt, the one with the peeling white lettering from a county fair 3 years earlier, and a pair of worn jeans. His sneakers were already muddy from the day before. He didn't bother cleaning them. This was supposed to be a simple trip. The Millbrook Farmers Market opened early on Fridays, and the Carters had a standing spot. Normally, Noah's father handled deliveries. But that morning, a piece of equipment had failed, and someone needed to stay behind to fix it. Noah had made the trip dozens of times before, riding his bike down the dirt road, cutting through County Road 50, and stopping at the market with 2 crates of strawberries strapped to the back. It was routine, safe, familiar. At least, that's how it felt. Noah's mother watched from the porch as he loaded the crates, reminding him, like she always did, not to linger in town and to come straight back once the berries were dropped off. Noah nodded, slung his backpack over one shoulder, and grinned. "I'll be back before lunch," he said. That was the last thing she ever heard him say. When noon came and Noah hadn't returned, no one panicked. Sometimes the market got busy. Sometimes Noah helped another vendor unload. Once, he'd stayed late because an old woman insisted on telling him stories about her childhood farm. Being late wasn't unusual. But when noon turned to 2 o'clock, and then 3, the worry settled in. By 4, his father drove into town. Noah's bike wasn't at the market. The vendor next to the Carter stall remembered seeing him arrive that morning. He'd unloaded the berries. He'd smiled. He'd waved goodbye. But no one saw which direction he went after that. By nightfall, Millbrook County deputies were knocking on doors. Search teams formed quickly. Volunteers combed the fields, the irrigation ditches, the woods beyond the property line. Dogs were brought in. Helicopters circled low over the farmland, their blades chopping the air into uneasy pieces. Noah's backpack was never found. His bike was never found. There were no signs of a struggle. No footprints leading off the road. No blood. No witnesses who remembered anything unusual. Just a boy who left to deliver strawberries and never came home. The sheriff's office reached a conclusion faster than Noah's parents were ready for. Within weeks, whispers began to circulate. A seasonal picker had been seen talking to Noah earlier that summer. A drifter passing through had asked about work on nearby farms. Someone claimed Noah had talked about leaving Millbrook someday, seeing more than just fields and fences. The theory settled in quietly. He'd run away. By winter, the sheriff said it openly. "Kids do this," he told reporters. "They see something bigger out there. California, maybe. Happens more than people think." The case was officially downgraded after 6 months. The searches stopped. The farm stayed quiet. And Noah's parents learned how to live with a hope that never quite died, but never moved forward either. 3 years passed. Millbrook County changed very little in that time. The same farms, the same roads, the same abandoned properties left behind when land stopped being profitable. But Emma Lewis changed. Emma had grown up one property over from the Carter farm. She and Noah had been inseparable since kindergarten, racing down dirt paths, trading strawberries for apples, making plans neither of them really believed would come true. When Noah disappeared, Emma never believed the runaway story. She couldn't explain why. She just knew. In the summer of 2017, Emma was 16 and restless. She'd been driving back roads with friends, killing time the way teenagers in Millbrook always did. That was when she noticed the warehouse. It sat just off County Road 50, half hidden by weeds and a collapsed fence. It had always been there, technically, but no one paid attention to it anymore. It hadn't been used in years. Maybe longer. Emma felt something twist in her stomach when she saw it. She told herself it was nothing. But she went back the next day alone. The building was worse up close, rusted metal siding, broken windows, a door hanging crooked on its hinges. The smell hit her first. Old wood. Rough. Something sour underneath it all. Behind the warehouse, she saw the clothesline. It stretched between 2 splintered posts, sagging under the weight of what hung from it. 7 shirts. Different sizes. Different colors. Some so sun-bleached they barely looked like fabric anymore. Emma stepped closer. Her breath caught. One of them was blue. Faded. Stretched thin. The lettering nearly gone, but still familiar. She knew that shirt. She had seen it 100 times, thrown over a chair, hanging on a fence post, crumpled in the dirt while Noah worked the fields. Her knees gave out before she realized she was falling. Emma screamed. Deputies arrived within the hour. They took the shirt down carefully, bagged it, and told Emma she'd done the right thing. They promised they would reopen the case. They promised answers. But as investigators searched the property, they found something far worse than a clothesline. Behind the warehouse, hidden beneath warped wooden planks and layers of dirt, was a root cellar. And when they pried open its door, they realized the shirts weren't trophies. They were evidence. And Noah Carter wasn't the only boy who had never run away. The root cellar wasn't meant to be hidden. That was the first thing investigators noticed once they cleared the debris away. It had been built properly, reinforced walls, a solid wooden door, rusted hinges that once swung smoothly. This wasn't some hastily dug hole. It was old, purposeful. The kind of structure that belonged to a working property decades ago, when farms stored potatoes, apples, and canned goods underground to survive harsh winters. But nothing inside it belonged to agriculture anymore. The air that rushed out when deputies forced the door open was stale and thick, like it had been sealed too long. Flashlights cut through the darkness, their beams catching on dust, cobwebs, and finally, fabric. Folded clothing. Stacked carefully along the dirt floor. Not dumped. Not scattered. Organized. Each pile held a shirt, sometimes a pair of pants. Some items were children's sizes. Others were slightly larger, meant for boys just beginning to grow. There were no shoes, no backpacks, no personal items beyond clothing, and no bodies. That detail confused investigators at first. If this was a crime scene, where was the rest of it? Where were the remains? Where was the violence everyone expected to see? Instead, what they found felt deliberate, controlled. Like the cellar had been used, emptied, and left behind on purpose. The blue T-shirt was confirmed within 48 hours. Noah Carter's mother didn't need DNA. She recognized the tear near the collar, the faded county fair logo, the way the fabric had thinned at the shoulders. Still, tests were run. The results matched fibers from clothing found in Noah's bedroom. For the first time in 3 years, Noah's case was officially reopened. And once his name was back in the system, others followed. Investigators cross-referenced missing persons reports from Millbrook County and the surrounding areas. What they found was unsettling, not because the disappearances were identical, but because they were quietly similar. Farm boys, ages ranging from 12 to 15. All vanished between 2009 and 2015. All from families tied to agriculture. All initially classified as runaways or voluntary missing. Different counties. Different sheriffs. Different assumptions. No one had ever put the pieces together. Until now. Emma Lewis gave her statement late into the night. She told detectives everything, how she'd noticed the warehouse, how something had pulled her back to it, how she recognized Noah's shirt immediately. She described the clothesline in detail, how the shirts were spaced evenly, how some were newer, others barely holding together. She also told them something else. That property wasn't as abandoned as people thought. Emma remembered trucks parked there sometimes. Late afternoons. Early evenings. Always gone by morning. She'd never seen anyone go inside, but she'd noticed the activity for years and never questioned it. Because no one ever did. County Road 50 wasn't monitored. There were no traffic cameras. No nearby homes close enough to notice patterns. The warehouse sat in a blind spot, visible enough to be ignored, isolated enough to be useful. Investigators began canvassing the area again, this time with fresh eyes. What they heard disturbed them. Several farmers recalled a man who moved easily between properties. He helped transport equipment, offered storage space when barns were full, lent trucks when someone's broke down. He knew the back roads, knew which families needed help and which ones couldn't afford to say no. He wasn't a stranger. He was familiar, trusted. He's been around forever, one farmer told detectives. Since I was a kid. But no one could remember exactly where he came from, or when he arrived. The sheriff's office hesitated to make announcements. There was fear now, not just concern. Parents began pulling their children inside before sunset. Farms locked gates that had never been closed before. Rumors spread faster than facts. 7 shirts had been found, but records suggested more boys had vanished over the years. So where were the rest? Search teams returned to the warehouse property with ground-penetrating radar. They searched nearby fields, tree lines, drainage areas. Nothing. It was as if the boys had passed through the place, but hadn't stayed. That realization changed the direction of the investigation entirely. This wasn't where it ended. This was where it passed through. Inside the root cellar, investigators found something they hadn't expected. Not evidence of violence, but evidence of movement. Scratches along the walls. Marks near the doorway where ropes may have once been tied. A faint outline on the dirt floor where something heavy had rested for a long time and then been removed. And on the back wall, carved faintly into the wood, a series of vertical lines. Tally marks. Too many to count quickly. When detectives brought in specialists, they confirmed what no one wanted to say out loud. This location functioned as a holding space. Temporary. The clothes weren't trophies. They were leftovers. What remained after the boys were taken somewhere else? The investigation widened beyond Millbrook County. State authorities were notified. Federal agencies were consulted quietly. Missing persons reports from agricultural regions were pulled and reviewed. Patterns emerged: routes, timelines, access points. Someone had been moving boys across county lines without raising alarms. Not by force, but by permission. Parents trusted farmhands, truck drivers, equipment operators, seasonal workers, people who had reasons to be around children without suspicion. Someone who could offer rides, work, opportunity, and who knew exactly which boys would be believed if they disappeared, and which ones wouldn't. Emma learned all of this weeks later. She sat in her car outside the Carter farm, watching Noah's parents work the fields like they always had. She wondered if they felt relief knowing he hadn't chosen to leave, or if that truth only made the waiting worse. She hadn't told them yet about the cellar marks, about the tally lines, about the possibility that Noah had been alive long after he vanished. Because investigators weren't ready to say it publicly. Not until they understood one thing. Who had access to every farm in the county for 20 years, without ever standing out. And then, buried deep in an old incident report from 2011, a name appeared again. Not as a suspect, not as a witness, but as someone who had helped organize searches, who had driven volunteers, who had comforted families, who had been present from the very beginning. The name didn't jump off the page. That was the problem. It wasn't circled in red or flagged as suspicious. It appeared casually, typed once, then again, buried inside routine reports written years apart by different deputies in different counties. But once investigators noticed it, they couldn't stop seeing it. The man had been present in at least 4 missing person cases involving farm boys. Not accused. Not questioned. Helpful. Always helpful. In Noah Carter's file, his name appeared as a volunteer driver who transported water and supplies during the first week of searches. In another case from a neighboring county, he'd offered temporary storage for equipment while search teams combed fields. In a third, he'd been the one to notify a sheriff's office that a boy hadn't shown up for work that morning. No complaints. No criminal history. No obvious reason to look twice. Until now. Investigators began reconstructing timelines. They charted disappearances on a map and overlaid known movements, deliveries, equipment transport routes, seasonal labor patterns. Slowly, a shape formed. A web of back roads, farms, and properties connected by one constant variable. The man moved freely. He wasn't tied to one employer. He worked contract jobs, hauling produce, repairing irrigation lines, storing surplus equipment. He owned a flatbed truck and 2 enclosed trailers registered under a small agricultural services business. The business had never been audited. It didn't need to be. Everything about it looked ordinary. When detectives began quietly asking farmers about him, the responses were almost identical. Good guy. Reliable. Been around forever. No trouble at all. Some couldn't remember his last name without checking old invoices. Others weren't sure where he lived. A few assumed he lived on one of the farms because he was always nearby. He existed in the margins, which meant no one really watched him. Emma Lewis followed the investigation from the outside. She wasn't allowed details, but bits and pieces leaked through conversations in town, half-finished sentences, worried looks exchanged between adults who suddenly realized how much they'd assumed over the years. Emma replayed memories she'd never questioned before. Trucks idling near the fields. Men offering rides home when bikes broke down. Promises of work, of extra cash, of helping families who were struggling. Millbrook County was built on trust. And trust, investigators now realized, had been the perfect cover. Forensic teams examined the warehouse again. They found traces of motor oil near the cellar entrance, consistent with equipment transport. Tire impressions in hardened dirt suggested trailers had been backed up repeatedly over the years. But nothing definitive enough to charge anyone. Everything pointed toward movement, not containment. The boys hadn't been held long. They'd been passed along. That theory terrified authorities. Because if the boys had been moved beyond the county, beyond the state, then jurisdiction fractured. Leads cooled faster. Records became harder to connect. And time, already stretched thin, worked against everyone. Investigators consulted national databases. Patterns resembling labor trafficking appeared, but nothing matched cleanly. The ages were wrong. The locations didn't line up neatly. This wasn't organized crime in the way people imagined it. It was quieter, more rural, more patient. Then came the interview. The man agreed to it willingly. He showed up alone, calm, cooperative. He answered questions without hesitation. He remembered the searches, remembered helping families, remembered Noah. He was a good kid, the man said. Hard worker, polite. He couldn't recall the last time he'd seen him. No contradictions, no defensiveness. When asked about the warehouse, he shrugged. Been empty for years, he said. People dump stuff there all the time. He denied owning the property. Records confirmed that. The land had changed hands several times, most recently through a shell company that led nowhere useful. The interview ended with handshakes. No arrest. No charges. Just more questions. Behind closed doors, investigators argued. Some believed the man was the facilitator, someone who delivered boys to someone else. Others believed he was being framed by coincidence, a familiar face dragged into suspicion because of proximity. There was no proof, only patterns. And patterns weren't enough. The shirts were sent for further analysis. Fibers, pollen, soil residue. They told a story too. Traces suggested the boys had been in multiple locations, fields, storage areas, vehicles. The environments overlapped but didn't settle in one place long enough to anchor the crime. Whoever had done this knew how to erase themselves, or had done it long enough to learn. The case stalled again. Press coverage spiked, then faded. New tips flooded in, most leading nowhere. The man stopped taking jobs in Millbrook County. He didn't disappear, he just drifted outward, taking work farther away. By the time anyone noticed, he was already gone. Emma stood near the warehouse one evening as autumn crept in. The clothesline was gone now. The cellar sealed. Warning tape fluttered uselessly in the wind. It looked smaller than it had the day she found it, less powerful, less threatening. But she knew better. Because somewhere beyond that property, beyond those fields, Noah's story still hadn't ended. And neither had the others. Investigators closed their internal review with a conclusion they hated writing. Insufficient evidence to identify a suspect. The case remained open, unsolved. Years later, the shirts would be returned to families, carefully cleaned, carefully folded, offered as the only physical proof that their sons hadn't simply chosen to leave. No remains were ever found. No arrests were ever made. And the man whose name appeared in all the files was never charged with a crime. He still exists, somewhere, working farms, driving back roads, blending in where trust comes easy and questions come late. And in Millbrook County, parents still teach their children to wave at passing trucks. Because it's how things have always been done. Even now. The official status of Noah Carter's case has not changed. It remains open. Not cold, because cold cases suggest abandonment. This one is still reviewed, still referenced, still quietly checked against new information when something similar happens somewhere else. But it has no active suspect, no arrest warrant waiting to be served, no final chapter investigators can point to and say this is where it ended. Because it didn't end. It simply stopped being visible. Millbrook County tried to move on. People always do. The warehouse off County Road 50 was eventually torn down. The land was cleared and sold, repurposed into a storage lot that now holds farming equipment behind a locked fence. The root cellar was filled with concrete. Nothing remains to mark what was found there. No plaque, no warning, no public record anyone would stumble across by accident. To an outsider, it's just another piece of land. To the people who live nearby, it's a place no one lingers. Noah's parents still work the farm. They stopped doing market deliveries themselves. A distributor handles it now. The strawberries still grow thick and sweet, but there are fewer smiles when they're picked. Every July brings attention that doesn't fade until the month passes. They keep Noah's room exactly as it was. The space between hope and grief became something they learned to live inside. Emma Lewis left Millbrook County 2 years after the warehouse discovery. She didn't announce it. She just went. College in another state. A new name on new forms. Distance that helped her breathe again. But some nights she still dreams about the clothesline, the way the shirts swayed gently in the wind, as if someone had hung them carefully, deliberately, with time to spare. She's spoken to investigators only once since leaving. They called to ask if she remembered anything else. She didn't. Or maybe she did, but memory can't always prove itself. Over the years, theories have grown where evidence could not. Some believe the boys were trafficked into forced labor operations far from home. Others believe they were sold to individuals who knew how to keep people invisible. A few think the truth is worse, something more isolated, more controlled, something that ended lives quietly and efficiently before anyone went looking. None of it can be proven. The man whose name appears in the files still hasn't been located. Records show he dissolved his business legally. No outstanding warrants. No charges. He didn't vanish. He simply stopped being easy to trace. Which is sometimes worse. Law enforcement officials admit something now they never said aloud in the beginning. The runaway narrative was convenient. It explained too much with too little effort. Rural disappearances didn't receive the same urgency. Farm kids were assumed to want more. And once that idea took hold, it shaped every decision that followed. Searches ended early. Questions stopped being asked. And someone noticed. Today, new policies are in place across several counties. Missing juveniles are no longer categorized as runaways without strict criteria. Multi-county data sharing is faster. Agricultural contractors undergo more scrutiny. Anonymous tips are taken more seriously than they were a decade ago. Those changes came too late for Noah. Too late for the others. But they exist because of them. Every year, on the anniversary of Noah's disappearance, his parents receive a handful of letters. Some are kind. Some are cruel. Some claim knowledge they can't back up. A few include directions, maps, promises of truth just out of reach. Investigators follow every lead. They always end the same way. Nothing. There is one detail that still troubles detectives more than any other. The tally marks. No one has ever agreed on what they meant. They didn't match the number of known missing boys. They weren't evenly spaced by time. And they were carved carefully, patiently, over what seemed like many years. Which means the truth might be larger than the cases already known. Larger than Millbrook County. Larger than anyone wants to imagine. Sometimes, years later, another farm boy goes missing somewhere else. Another rural county. Another quiet road. Another explanation offered too quickly. And every time, someone pulls Noah's file. They compare details, routes, names, work patterns. They look for echoes. So far, nothing has crossed the line into certainty. But patterns don't disappear. They wait. In Millbrook County, the fields still stretch wide under open skies. Trucks still roll down dirt roads at dawn. People still wave to one another, because trust is hard to kill, even when it's been used against you. Parents walk their children a little closer now. They ask more questions. They listen longer. Because they know something they didn't before. That sometimes, the danger doesn't arrive loudly. It shows up helpful. Familiar. Already invited in. Noah Carter was 13 years old when he left his family's strawberry farm to make a delivery. 3 years later, his shirt was found hanging behind an abandoned warehouse. Everything in between remains unanswered. And until someone speaks or makes a mistake, the fields will keep their secrets. Just as they always have. What really happened to Noah Carter that day remains a mystery, one that still haunts Millbrook County. Was he taken by someone the community trusted, or did a cruel twist of fate lead him into the wrong hands? We may never know for certain, but we want to hear what you think. Share your theories in the comments below. Your insight could help piece together the puzzle that has puzzled investigators for years. And if you believe the missing deserve to be remembered, consider subscribing to our channel. Every story we tell keeps their memory alive and ensures these mysteries are never forgotten.